The debate between analog sound versus digital sound is one that's been going on for decades and probably will continue to go on until the end of time. I touched on this in yesterday's video a little bit when I talked about my journey from analog to a digital sound. But at the end of that video, or after I did that video, I thought, there was still a lot to unpack in that conversation, debate / discussion. And there was a lot that I felt I hadn't covered and still needed to cover, such as what is the difference between analog sound and digital sound, for those who don't know. And the key question that usually comes up in that discussion or debate is, which do you prefer and why? And I didn't get into any of that stuff in yesterday's video. So I felt yesterday's video required a follow-up or a part 2. And so here it is. My name is Maurice, aka DJ Croc from One Nation Experience, and welcome to One Nation Daily, part of a 30-day challenge for me to show up here and talk to you about a different topic on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you get a heads up when I post a new video. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help me to grow the channel. So today's video, part 2 of this analog versus digital discussion. Yesterday was about analog to digital. Today is going to be more about analog versus digital and what are the differences and which do I prefer. So let's get into it. So what is the difference between analog sound and digital sound? Without getting too technical, it basically is just the difference in the process and the format that is used to produce audio sound. All right, without getting too technical into it, just a different process and format that's used to produce audio sound. The best way that I can think of to illustrate the difference between analog sound and digital sound is to imagine you're watching the same thing on two televisions side by side, and one TV is in 4K and the other TV is in 8K. Now, which TV do you think would represent analog sound and digital sound? Would the 4K TV represent digital sound, or would the 4K TV represent analog sound? Would the 8K TV represent digital sound, or would it represent analog sound? Most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. If they were looking at two TVs and one is in 4K and one is in 8K, many people would not be able to tell the difference between the two, or would not be able to pick out which of those TVs is 4K and which is 8K. So many of them wouldn't know the difference or see the difference, but there is a difference. They are different. 8K is not the same as 4K. 8K does give extra detail, extra clarity, extra depth over the 4K television, even though many people wouldn't be able to notice it or spot it. For those who can notice it and spot it, they are more likely to value and appreciate that difference, and therefore probably spend that extra money to buy an 8K TV because they see and want that experience, if it means that much to them. All right. Likewise with analog and digital sound. If you play a piece of music and one is in an analog format, such as straight off the vinyl, like these records behind me, and the same piece of music in a digital format, say an MP3, a good quality MP3, not something that's been ripped off YouTube, a good quality MP3, and ask people which one of these is the analog version and which one of them is the digital version, just like with the TVs, many people wouldn't be able to tell the difference or be able to correctly identify which is which, because the differences are subtle, but they are there. Just like with the 8K and 4K TV, they might look very similar, but they are not the same. There is a difference. And it is the analog sound, not the digital sound. It's the analog sound that gives, for me and to my ear, that extra brightness and that extra body and depth that the digital sound does not. So if you want, you can imagine the 8K TV is the same as 8K sound. Think of it like that. 8K sound, or Analog sound is like the 8K TV. It has that extra definition, that extra brightness, extra body, extra warmth, if you like, to it. So that's the simplest way I can break down the difference between analog sound and digital sound. Subtle difference that many people would miss, but it is a difference that is there. And for those who can hear it or see it, many are prepared to do whatever they need to do or spend whatever they need to spend to have that experience. All right. So think of it as difference between 8K and 4K TVs. The 8K TV, that's analog sound. The 4K TV, that's digital sound. Now, both of those will be very, very good. 4K and 8K are both very, very good. Will give you very, very good picture quality. They're not going to be bad. They're both going to look very, very crisp, very clear. But like I said, there is a subtle difference between the two. All right. So that's the best way I can break it down. Imagine or think of analog sound being the 8K TV and digital sound being the 4K TV. Very similar, both very good, but one is just a little bit better than the other. Which is best? Well, you might think, that's a stupid question, Maurice, or because obviously the 8K TV is going to be better than the 4K TV. Not necessarily. So yes, the 8K TV can produce a more detailed picture and give more depth in the picture and do more than the 4K TV can. But it's not just about what it can do, it's about what experience you are trying to have and what experience you value. Now, say for example, going back to this TV analogy, I don't really value 8K TV, even 4K TVs. My TV at home is a standard HD TV. It's not 8K, it's not even 4K because I don't really value that experience, and my TV barely comes on at all at home, to be honest. In fact, my TV doesn't really come on at all in the day, and it only comes on in the evening, maybe to watch the first 2 minutes of a news program, and I may watch an episode of The Simpsons, and I may watch a movie. Other than that, my TV doesn't really come on. So I don't really value an 8K or 4K experience like that. So I wouldn't say that's going to be the best for me because I wouldn't really value it like that. Also, I like watching old movies. Humphrey Bogart is my favorite actor, and naturally most of his films are in black and white and were made in the early to mid 1900s. Do I really want to watch a Humphrey Bogart film in 8K? No. Why? Because my experience and relationship with those films is based on when they were made. And if I'm watching a Humphrey Bogart film that is based in the 1920s, 30s, 40s or 50s, I want it to look and feel like it was made in that same era. I want to feel like I am in that era when I'm watching the film. If I'm watching a bogey film that looks like it was made yesterday or with today's technology and with that level of definition, it would be a completely different experience for me. And I doubt that I would feel like I'm in that era, even though the film might be based in that era. I don't think I would feel like I am in that era when I'm watching it, if it looks like it was made on today's technology, if that makes sense. So it does depend to a degree on the kind of experience that you want to have. Some people, digital producers, for decades have been trying to recreate the analog sound in their digital music. And the most common way that they do that is by taking the Rice Krispies from the record, the snap, crackle and pop sound when the needle is on the record, and artificially creating that and putting it into their digital tracks so that when you listen to it, it sounds like a record is playing, even though there is no record. It's a completely digital track. It sounds like you are having an analog experience, even though you are not. Many of us will have heard a digital track where we press play on a digital track and it begins with the sound of a needle dropping on a record at the beginning of that digital track, to make it sound and feel like you are having that kind of analog experience of putting one of these on a turntable, even though you are not. Or they will, at the end of a track, they will use the sound when the needle is at the end of the record and have that at the end of the digital track to make it sound like the end of this piece of music is the end of the record that you're playing, even though there's no record, it's all digital. Or they'll take that snap, crackle and pop and use it throughout the record. But the point is, many digital producers still try to artificially create an analog sound and feel for the music and experience for the listener, even though it's not analog at all. It is all digital. And I think there's also something about authenticity and originality in that as well, especially if you're producing music that you want it has an influence from a yesteryear and you want it to have that kind of some level of integrity or authenticity from that time period, then you might put some snap, crackle and pop. You might put some Rice Krispies in your digital track to make it feel like it's from that era. Do you know what I mean? So there is that too. Likewise with picture. In today's modern video editing softwares, there are lots of filters and things that you can use to make videos look like they are made or have been made in the early 1900s, even though you're making them now. So there is something about authenticity and maybe representation in the use of analog tools or trying to recreate analog experiences in a digital era. So as to which is best, I guess what I'm trying to say is it kind of depends on your personal preference and also the experience that you want to have. If you want to have an 8K experience, then you'll prefer an 8K TV. If you don't, you're not really that fussed about it, then you won't. If you want to have the best quality sound you can possibly get, then you'll probably be more likely to go for an analog sound, that 8K sound, if you see it that way. And if not, then you won't. So it really kind of does depend on personal preference. And also there are practicalities to consider when it comes to analog versus digital sound as well, which I'll come on to now when I talk about my preference. So key question, what is my personal preference? Analog sound versus digital sound. Well, you probably guessed that my personal preference is analog sound for the reason I've stated before. To my ear, analog sound is just a little bit brighter and just has a little bit more body and depth to it than digital sound does. It's like 8K sound, over 4K or standard HD sound, if you want to look at it in that way. I tend to still use analog components at home. In fact, I use mostly analog components at home. As you see, I have a whole record collection behind me. I still play all of my records on my analog turntable, my fully analog Techniques turntable. I still have all, you see my cassette rack, my rack of cassette tapes right next to the records rack. I still play all of my cassette tapes. I still have my cassette deck and play my cassette tapes. I still have an analog 33 band graphic equalizer, which I took off my original sound system that I was building, and I use that now on my home domestic set. So I still use mostly analog components at home because I want the best sound quality I can possibly get at home. And if you ask anybody who's been to my home, they will tell and heard this set, they will tell you it is very, very serious. This is a very, very serious sound that I have and have created in this space. So my personal preference on the criteria of sound quality alone is analog all day, every day. Analog, analog, analog. I prefer analog sound over digital sound all day, every day. Even though the two might be very, very good. Like I said, with the 4K and 8K TV, both are still very good. 4K and 8K, both are very, very good. Gonna give very sharp, clear pictures, but they're not the same. 8K does have more to it. So, like with the analog sound has more to it. That's my personal preference. However, even though analog sound is my personal preference, it is not necessarily my personal choice when it comes to my work. Why is that? Why would I not want to have the best possible sound quality when it comes to my work, given that I talk so much about getting the best sound quality, particularly in my work? Well, that is because there are practical considerations when it comes to this debate between analog versus digital sound. And for me, when it comes to my work, the practicalities of using analog or digital sound, or the practicalities, I should say, of using digital sound outweigh the additional audio benefits of getting analog sound. So in yesterday's video, I talked about my journey from analog to digital, and I talked about the original rack that I built that had a number of different analog components in it: the stereo valve compressor, stereo valve preamp, the graphic EQ, just different components, all separate analog components in this case, and just how the thing was just big and heavy and cumbersome and awkward. Sometimes I couldn't even fit it into a space in a venue. So having to lug that thing around was not fun. It really wasn't, even though the sound quality was delish, absolutely delicious, beautiful, loved it. And I miss it, if I'm honest. But the practicalities of having to lug that thing around just meant that it got to a point where it just didn't make sense anymore. So yesterday I talked about how I replaced that rack with the Allen & Heath QU16, which I showed in yesterday's video. You can watch that and take a look at that. And basically what that did was compress or combine everything from the rack unit into one smaller, lighter, more compact, more portable unit, which made much more sense for my work. How different was the sound quality? Not much difference. There wasn't that much difference. Just like the 4K and the 8K TV, there's not a lot of difference. They're both still very, very good. But I'd gone from 8K to 4K, which is still great, but because the practicalities really demanded it. And then yesterday, also at the end of yesterday's video, I showed the most latest acquisition in terms of our sound processing, which is the DBX Drive Rack PA2. That's the latest sound processor that we have here. Not even had in a week. I haven't even switched it on yet. But basically that is another form of compressing pretty much everything that the other units do in terms of sound processing ability into an even smaller, more compact, lighter and more portable unit. Yeah, so the drive rack, the DBX Drive Rack PA2 just compresses everything again into a smaller, more compact, lighter and more portable unit. And these practicalities are too great for me to ignore, especially when I'm doing events by myself or I'm going to do a sound system setup or whatever by myself. Having to carry less, lighter equipment is extremely valuable and makes all the sense in the world. Nobody wants to be carrying heavier equipment than they need to. If you can carry lighter, more compact equipment, that's a plus, especially, like I said, if you're doing a lot of this stuff on your own. All right, so there are practicalities to consider, and those practicalities in terms of my work outweighed or got to a point where they outweighed the benefits, the extra benefits of having this slightly better audio from using analog components. Just like with these, the difference between me carrying this section of records here, that's 100 records. roughly or thereabouts in one of these squares. 100 or maybe a little over 100 records in there. There's a big difference between carrying 100 records and 100 digital files on a USB stick in your pocket or on your keyring. Big practical difference. Big practical difference. Storing thousands of records takes up much more space than storing thousands of MP3s on an MP3 on a USB stick or your laptop. Do you think I'd rather be carrying, I don't know, thousands of records or thousands of MP3s on a laptop? Obviously, I'd rather carry the laptop. I wouldn't want to carry these. Do you know what I mean? So there are practical considerations as well. In fact, it reminds me of the very day and the very moment when I decided to stop carrying records as a standard when I played out. And I remember the gig clearly. It was one I did in Streatham, and there were lots of other sounds on the bill. And this venue had a basement that you had to go down into. It was like a basement. You went down these stairs, and I went to this venue with, I don't remember how many boxes of records, and I couldn't get anywhere to park near the venue, so I had to park way down the road. It was down a hill, and so I then had to carry the records up the hill to this place. And then when I got there, security had to open up all of my boxes and, do their search or what have you. And then I had to carry these records down these tight stairs, down into this basement. And by the time I got to the DJ booth, I was sweating buckets. And then I noticed that all the other DJs, they all had bloody rucksacks with a laptop in it or a CD pouch or a USB stick. And I felt like a fool. And that was the moment when I said, no more, no mas, no more, no more lugging these records as standard. Obviously, I still do vinyl sets, but not as standard. As standard now, I walk with my laptop, all right? And I DJ digitally, even though I still use turntables because I'm used to that format, and I give my best performances as a DJ when I'm using turntables. Also, the practicality of carrying these records is not just about the weight of the records, it's also, or the size of the records, it's also about my selection and how much my selection would be limited if I chose to carry records to every gig. Now, the records might sound better because they're going to give me that analog sound, that analog 8K sound. So they might sound better than the digital files. However, I will be very limited in my selection if I chose to carry records all the time. There's only a couple of hundred of records I can carry. I can't carry thousands of records to a gig, but I can carry thousands of digital tracks on a laptop or on a USB stick. So that's another practical consideration. These might sound better, but for practical terms, I'll be very limited in my selection, and I can carry way more music digitally than I could ever carry in terms of records. What I'm trying to highlight is there are practicalities around choosing analog over digital. Heavier equipment, more equipment to carry, more storage space. Not being able to stand in the middle of a room and tune the set the same way that you see me doing when I have my iPad and I connect it digitally or remotely to either the Q16 mixing desk, or I'll be able to do that now with the DBX drive rack, and I can stand in the room and tune it digitally from where the people are going to be standing. These are practical things you can't really do when it comes to analog reproduction or analog music, So there are practicalities involved. So for my personal preference, my personal preference is analog sound over digital sound in terms of sound quality all day, and that's what I use primarily at home. But for my work, my choice is digital, because the practicalities for me in terms of my work far outweigh the additional benefits of the extra sound quality. I kind of hope that makes more sense and puts a bit more meat on the bones of this discussion around, or this debate around analog versus digital sound. I hope I've answered any questions that you might have. If I haven't, feel free to drop a question in the comments section and I'll reply, or let me know your preference of analog versus digital sound in the comments section, or just let me know what you thought of this video. Also, like I said before, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help us to grow the channel. That is it for now. Also, don't forget to like and share this video. Somebody might find this useful. That's it for now. I'll be back tomorrow with another one, but until then, stay blessed. Peace.